Good morning and welcome everyone to this, our mid-year insight webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're delighted you could find the time to listen to our observations and our market insights this year. So the format for the next hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes or so is we're going to be sharing some insights into our mid-year insight reports and some data points. And then we're delighted today to be joined by Marcia Viccars and Jordan Tully. And we'll be then going into a panel debate after Nick and I have shared our market insights. So to start, I'd just like to introduce everyone that's on this webinar this afternoon. So Marcia, you might to introduce yourself firstly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcia Viccars. I have spent some 20 years plus in the sector in a variety of positions and in a variety of organisations. Currently, I am the Mergers and Acquisitions Director for Happy Days Nurseries.
Great, lovely. Thank you for joining us, Marcia. And Jordan, I'll come over to you, Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan Tully. I'm currently the Managing Director for Toots Nursery Group, and I've previously worked for a medium-sized nursery, overseeing all of their operations as well.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much, Jordan and Marcia. So we will be joining us shortly in our panel debate. But firstly, myself and my colleague Nick are going to share our market insights with you. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thanks, Courtney. My name's Nick Brown. I'm Head of Brokerage and Childcare Education at Christie Co. I've been in this industry circa 26 years now, and at Christie Co. almost 11 years.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. So firstly, we're going to just provide you with a bit of an overview in terms of what we've been seeing in the UK day nursery market over the past 6 months of this year. And gosh, those 6 months have really flown by. It's been a very buoyant, active, and actually really quite an eventful year across the UK nursery market. And we're really hoping that in sharing our insights with you, whether you're looking to expand further or grow further this year, or whether or not you're thinking about contemplating a possible sale, then hopefully these insights will enable you to understand what's been happening in the marketplace and sort of enable you to then make informed decisions about your business and your plans for the next 6 to 12 months ahead. So as I said, I mean, we've seen a lot of activity. There have been lots of challenges as well. Ultimately, this seminar is entitled Thriving Through Change. And we gave this webinar that title, because we have seen a lot of change in the marketplace this year for a variety of different reasons. So it's been a busy 6 months. One of the highlights which I felt we had to mention was that in the first 6 months of this year, Christie Co celebrated our 90th anniversary. As a business, we were founded on the 6th of May in 1935, and we had a fabulous celebration with clients and colleagues, many of whom we've worked with over multiple decades, a few months ago in London. And it was interesting because on our webpage, there are various sort of videos that were taken on the evening. And some of the feedback that came through was that 90 years on, our clients today could still see the core values that were our sort of core pillars founded 90 years ago in terms of being adaptable, collaborative, innovative, trusted, and leading advisors. So that's been a highlight of our year so far, alongside really sort of highlights within the marketplace. So here we are, some of the key statistics that we've sort of collated from the activity that our National Childcare Education team have undertaken and facilitated during the first 6 months of this year. The statistics here specifically relate to activity and work across the day nursery sector. Obviously, I know a number of you are aware that Christie Co work across all childcare and education regulated markets for children from birth to 19 years. So alongside our work in the nursery markets, we also work across the independent schools sector, the SEND schools markets, and also the looked after children's services arenas as well. But these statistics are purely in relation to activity that we've seen in the first 6 months of this year across the UK day nursery market. I think it's been a phenomenally busy year, as evidenced by the positive increase in statistics that we're reporting on here. So I think in terms of the key stats, all of the KPIs that we sort of look at the market against have all moved forward quite significantly. And some of the drivers for that have been the changes that the sector has been navigating through, not just policy changes, such as the increase to the funded provision and sort of the programme that's been generating and rolling up for over recent months, but also just in terms of the business operating environment. And I think a lot of the activity we've seen this year, particularly in the first quarter, stems directly back to the announcements that Chancellor Rachel Reeves made in October in the budget statement last year. So I think, as you might remember, when we published our business outlook report in January, we spoke about how active and how we saw so much heightened activity in the sort of the last few weeks running up to the autumn budget. And a lot of that was because of the anticipation that the Chancellor might make announcements to changes relating to inheritance tax or also business asset disposal relief taxes. Now that did take effect in the Chancellor's budget in autumn, and we saw the 10% business asset disposal relief rate essentially being increased throughout a number of staged increases, the most recent of which happened on the 5th of April this year. And we're seeing another increase in BADR rates from the 5th of April next year. So over that very finite period of time, BADR rates will have gone from 10% up to 16%. And that has really fueled a lot of business owners to contemplate, what their tax positions were and where they were in their journey of business ownership. And I think against the backdrop of changed regulatory environments, different political policies, we did see a surge in owners that reached out to us ahead of last year's budget and just after the autumn budget, essentially exploring their decision to sell their nurseries. So we saw a 16.9% increase in the number of nurseries that we've been out to see during the first 6 months of this year. There has been no shortage of buyers actively keen to acquire high quality nurseries across England, Scotland and Wales. So we've seen a similar 19.6% increase in the number of viewings of the nurseries that have been selling over the first 6 months of this year. We've seen a 13% increase in the number of nurseries that are available for sale. And a really interesting point on that is, based on the nurseries that we've brought to the market during the first 6 months of this year, we've seen quite a notable shift we advise across a whole range of different businesses, from small packaways in church halls through to large single assets and through to regional groups. But this year particularly, the number of instructions that we're advising on of the sale of single setting nurseries that have been owned for 15, 20, 25 years that are actually generating really sizable levels of earnings has undoubtedly increased. These are long established, high quality businesses, and it very much links into that sort of commentary that I just shared around owners that have been long standing in the sector for a variety of reasons, deciding now's the time that they would like to sell and pursue a confidential exit. So while there have been more nurseries for sale, there's also been a higher quality of nurseries available in the marketplace. We have seen a 3.5 or 3.3% increase in the number of offers that buyers are making for the businesses that they'd like to acquire. So that's a notable increase as well, alongside a 62.5% increase in deals being agreed and deals completing. So the first 6 months have been incredibly buoyant, incredibly active. Interestingly, I'm sure you'll remember from our January outlook report and from our mid-year report last year, we continue to see an increase in the size of nurseries that the regional groups and the corporate buyers are looking to acquire. I mean, across the UK, still the average size of UK nursery is just 45 places, but the buyers, sort of year on year, they're gravitating to buying nurseries that are larger than the UK average, because I think there's an appreciation. It's really difficult to have a very operationally efficient nursery the smaller your service is, and that's why we've seen the small to medium sized groups buying larger nurseries, on average 60 places. And then the larger corporate groups, on average, from the acquisitions they've done this year, their average size has been 88.7 places. That number's shifting out year on year. I think as well, it's just really interesting to note that obviously at the end of each year, we produce our business review and we publish that in January. And each year, I think Nick and I, never fail to be amazed in terms of the price indice movement that's gathered over that period. It was worth summarising that here. The only two times we've seen a negative impact on the price index growth for day nurseries were during COVID in 2020, and obviously markets were challenged, and also during 2023 following the Liz Truss sort of period of reign and the financial implications that brought. But based on what we've seen so far this year, I think we are going so far as to say we are expecting another year of double-digit growth movements across the assets we're selling, for a number of reasons in terms of the high quality of those assets, the sheer pool of buyers that are really enthusiastic and keen to expand, and also we're expecting a further increase in nurseries coming to the market as we sort of approach the autumn budget, because obviously the Chancellor now has a very difficult balancing act in terms of changes over the past week or so regarding benefits, and what the plans have been there have now been sort of amended slightly. So we therefore are expecting some potentially notable announcements in the autumn budget. I think just touching in terms of buyer types as well. So the vast majority of activity, so just over 58% of transactions that we've brokered at Christie Co year to date, they have been sold to the larger corporate groups. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more of the independent and newer entrants and first-time buyers that are really sort of enthused by the opportunity investing in early years can create. So 28.8% of our sales have been to newer entrants, first-time buyers, and smaller independent settings buying their second or third nursery. So quite a mix of buyer activity. Also, we've seen that continued trend in terms of the volume of leaseholds that are being sold. Interestingly, 53% of the transactions we've brokered so far this year were leasehold, existing leases, or there were new leases being granted. That is at odds to the level of leases that we saw and we transacted last year, where actually 80% of transactions were leasehold. We think it's representative of the types of opportunities we brought to the market this year. We do still expect that leasehold trend to continue in the short to medium term. So that was really just a snapshot of some of the key data points from our newly published mid-year insight report. There's a QR code there where you can download a full copy of the report. But Nick's now going to share some insights and explore some of the case studies and sales, so you can get a flavour for what's been sold, different locations and different types of assets. So I'll hand over to you now, Nick.
Thank you, Courtney. I think just to continue with that theme, what we wanted to try and do over the next 3 or 4 slides is to give a good cross-section of what's happening across the market. Not all about the biggest sales, it's all about location, different sizes of nurseries that have sold, and different types of people that have entered the sector. But if we start with the first slide, this is a fantastic group that sold earlier on in the year. And the reason I wanted to bring it up on this webinar was that this was an organic group. The people that owned this group actually did exactly the same process about 8 years ago, where they found their properties, started nursery up from scratch and grew organically to a certain size, then exited. They rejoined the market and did exactly the same thing again, and built a fantastic group of nurseries across sort of Sussex, Surrey and Kent. And then after being approached by someone direct to buy, and that didn't quite work, they then came to us and we facilitated a sale at a market-setting number. But I think it's just good to see that people do start their groups up organically and can grow to a sizable sort of structure and be very, very popular. I think just from what Courtney just said then, if you go to our second example, it isn't, whilst we do see a lot of the bigger size, it isn't all about that. I mean, here we've got an example again of a 42 place setting. Perfect add-on for an existing operator in that location, very well run, nice and profitable. And time again, we see people looking to exit because generally looking to spend more time with their families, if not retire. And that's when we get approached. Thanks, Courtney. I wanted to put this slide on, or this particular nursery in Ancaster, because we did see a change in the buyer profile as we came out of COVID the last few years, where what would have been potentially seen as a semi-rural nursery, might be doing okay, occupancy was doing fine, trickling along. Suddenly those began to change, and nurseries that were running on that sort of process have suddenly become a lot fuller. And I think that is a byproduct of what we've seen, where people generally moved out from London and started to live in more rural locations, and started to use nurseries that were closer to them. I think people are commuting more, but we have seen these size nurseries get more and more popular. And here's a prime example of one that we sold recently. The one beneath that, the reason I wanted to highlight this was, they're not all simple sales where it's just about the nursery and the business. And this particular sales a very profitable nursery, but what it did have that made it the nuance of it was that it had living accommodation with it. So we do come across that quite a lot. That can be helpful, and that can also be a hindrance to a sale, because not all buyers want living accommodation. Maybe use it for staff potentially, but actually in this particular deal, we managed to broker a deal where they retained the accommodation on the top floor, and we actually sold the nursery which traded below them. But again, it just shows you the different sorts of types of nurseries that we get brought to the market. So this fantastic looking nursery at the top of the page, the reason I mention this is because this was a former police station. This is a recent sale, it's only just happened. It's a 110 place nursery. But again, the utilisation of what would have been a property for a different use has come to the market, and it has been converted into an A1 nursery, helping someone to retire. But as you can see, looks fantastic and was super popular in a highly confidential sale. I think the example we've got below that is that we sort of see nurseries in all sorts of locations. Again, this was a fantastic, very profitable nursery that the owners have created an amazing setting, basically out of a total fitness gym or part of a total fitness gym. So it doesn't have to be that your nursery is in a double-fronted, huge Victorian property. It just shows about doesn't matter where you are, but it's what you put into that nursery, and they can become super popular. And again, was part of a very high-profile sort of transaction and achieved an exceptional price. A couple more to show you, and again, the one at the top of the page is. This was, as you can see, is a fantastic looking property. These are actually converted stables within a manor house and the grounds of a manor house. And this is what buyers are looking for. Something a bit different, sets itself out from the norm. Parents obviously love that. It was very, very busy nursery, produced an excellent EBITDA. But again, the market is there to look at all sorts of properties. So it doesn't have to be a 6,000 square foot single story property for them to be interested. And I think this is a great example of that. And the last example I've got, whilst this isn't the sold, we do bring to the market all sorts of properties that have potential alternative use for nurseries or for special educational needs or for care. But again, I wanted to know that we are seeing more and more of that, and we're looking at all avenues for operators to see if we can find that special place where they can house their nursery or start their first nursery. And I think this is a super example of that.
That's great. Thanks for that summary, Nick. That's much appreciated. So in terms of Q&A, we do have a Q&A function box at the bottom of the screen, or hopefully the bottom of your screen. So we'd very much invite any questions that you have, and we'll endeavour to sort of go through those and answer those during the course of this webinar. I think, as Nick says, what's really interesting is just the wide variety of assets that have transacted over the past 12 months. I mean, looking further afield, there has been some uncertainty this year in terms of the Israel-Iran conflict, obviously Donald Trump and tariffs and some challenges around that. But nurseries in the UK, the markets are incredibly confident, and banks and lenders lending those markets are really confident, and lots of positivity and lots of opportunity as well. So it's been a very buoyant and interesting year. There have been some challenges as well, but I think that's just the market we work in, and all businesses go through different challenges. So we've shared some of the highlights from our first 6 months of the year, and we're now delighted to welcome Marcia and Jordan to sort of share their insights, and we've got a few themes that we'd like to explore during the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so. So I'd like to start by asking you both in terms of what have been your highlights in the first 6 months of this year? What sort of stands out as a highlight for you in your businesses and from your perspective? Shall we, Marcia, might you like to go first?
Thank you, Courtney. I'd say I'd echo everything that you and Nick have already said. I think we've seen an incredibly busy first 6 months. There's been lots of exciting opportunities coming to the marketplace. I'd say there's also been lots of really good quality nurseries, be that ones and twos or small groups coming to the marketplace. And I would say that as ever, they can command a good price, good multiples. There's a lot of very good settings out there, and I think I would also echo what you said about reasons for people looking to get out of the market now. I think there's always, I think sometimes we're quite negative about the market, but I think there's lots of positive reasons for people looking to move on as well. And as you say, some of those are re-entering the market and doing it all over again for a second and third time.
Thanks, Marcia. That never fails to surprise us, does it, Nick,
Yeah.
in terms of helping people prepare for their retirement sales. They then exit, and then 3 or 4 later, they're thinking, it's such a great sector, isn't it? So they want to re-enter the market and grow again. So yes, you're quite right, Marcia. While people have been exiting, there are equally lots of new entrants and buyers that are wanting to return. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Jordan, what are your highlights? What are your thoughts on the year so far?
So I completely agree. I think with everything that you've said, and obviously what Marcia just said as well. I think for me as well, I've definitely seen a shift in the pressures on nurseries. I think, and don't want to sound tone deaf when I say it, but I definitely think there have been some release points in some what were quite big pressure points at some points for us. So, I definitely think that staffing, although be an issue, has definitely become easier. And actually get it right. We've seen this a lot of the settings that we deal with are purely acquisitions, and actually get it right with a really strong retention rate of the existing teams, and then that really does alleviate such a big pressure when you speak to people about why they may want to exit the sector with their own issues around staffing or retaining their staff. I definitely think that's a pressure point that has eased a little bit, albeit not completely resolved. But I think that it's a retention thing that we've definitely seen a bit of a better grip on.
No, that's really helpful, Jordan. And I'd like to return to you actually on that point in terms of workforce and staffing and pressure points. But Nick, have you got anything further to add from your perspective from your highlights of the year so far?
I've got too many to mention, Courtney, to be honest. No, no, it's been a super first half of the year. I think we never underestimate that last year was a big year for us, and we've started the first half of this year really, really strongly, and it's ahead of where we thought we'd be. It isn't all about sales. It's about, we all want this industry to survive, and it's just amazing to sort of see, like Jordan was saying then, the challenges, they seem to get dampened down because everyone just seems to get on with it and deal with it. That's what's the really brilliant thing about this sector is. Yes, the next challenge comes along, but once again, I think, and I'll touch on what Marcia said, I'm careful how I sort of phrase this, but, this sector's in a really good position in some ways. Take us back 15 years, we were never selling nurseries at the sort of levels that we are now. I don't mean in terms of numbers, I mean in terms of value. So if you're an owner, things that have got much more valuable, and that's only because of one reason, because there are more buyers out there that want to buy you and pay that premium price for you. So I think we're in a really good place, and I think we seem to be able to sort of deal with all the different challenges that get chucked. There'll be another one around the corner shortly, but we've got to stay positive because it's a green light sector which everyone holds up pretty high in their estimation, which is a really good fact, really.
I agree, Nick. I agree. And it's interesting in terms of, that within the transactions that we broker, in terms of what buyers are looking for, staffing is key in terms of the workforce that the businesses that are being sold employ, their continuity, their qualifications, their experience. And Jordan, you're right in terms of your comments there before about the workforce challenges. I certainly feel similar in terms of the feedback we hear that we have navigated through some really acute workforce challenges, but hopefully things are feeling slightly less challenging than they have done than previously. I know you presented a session recently in terms of inclusion and in terms of the culture of workforces. And obviously, it's one thing trying to recruit, new colleagues to your setting, but then also trying to sort of retain and look after. Nick and I, we were at an event a few weeks ago now, and there was a fascinating presentation around Gen Z and how nursery providers and business owners, how they can adapt their businesses to appeal to, I guess, the requirements and approach of Gen Z. But I'd be keen to learn more about, in terms of, in your experience in it too, some of the attributes that you've learned in terms of inclusion and creating a good culture. Because if you can retain staff and it's a happy workforce, it's one of the keys to success, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that quite a lot of the time as well, in every group I've ever worked in, and I expect in every setting and every group in the land, one of your KPIs is always around your staffing costs, because it's our biggest expense. It is our people are our biggest expense, and rightfully so, because they're amazing at what they do. And I think we always talk about the cost of recruitment, but we never sometimes really talk about the cost of retention. And we say things like we can't afford to recruit. We can't afford to do things to retain, but actually we spend a lot more than that on recruitment. So I think if we retain high quality staff, that's better for us from obviously from a profitability perspective, because our percentage of profit is going to go up, because we know our biggest expense is our staffing cost, but also from the benefits the children are going to see, the experiences that the parents have, everything else that we can see from that perspective, we're only going to see increases. And we know that there's lots of research that's been done by Harvard and other places like that. One of the percentages is that 76% more engagement in companies that have a high positive culture, 50% more productivity, 29% more staff satisfaction with their work-life balance. There is so many benefits to getting the staffing side right, and that in turn will then translate into the figures. So sometimes you think that they're completely separate, when we talk about operations or quality or operations and this and that, but actually get that right and you will see that translate into your figures and your profitability.
No, couldn't agree more, Jordan. Absolutely key, isn't it? If the retention is there and the culture is there and it's a happy team, then that does absolutely transition into quality and into parents' perceptions as well, ultimately, doesn't it? And therefore the profile of the nursery and the success of the nursery. So no, very helpful insights. Marcia, can I come to you? Because obviously on that theme of quality workforce and looking after employees, I'm really mindful that on the transactions that our team broker, so many are done in a confidential environment. It's actually the team at the nursery that is the last to hear, and there's so much nervousness about sort of sharing that message. Your experience of taking over nurseries and how you give that comfort and confidence to the workforce from day one, because many of them will have worked with their business owners and directors for, it could be generations in some cases. So change is a big thing for some people to overcome, isn't it?
Absolutely it is, Courtney. I think cultural alignment and leadership is key initially when you're acquiring a setting. I think it's about, winning hearts and minds, particularly like you say, if you're acquiring a family-run business, for example, they could have had the one owner practically sat in the office next to them for 5 days a week for umpteen years. And I think it's really important. I think, you have to be mindful that any abrupt changes can alienate the staff and the parents. I think you've really got to strive to strike a balance between standardizing your operations and preserving local identity, which is why I go back to saying it's key to have people from your organization in the setting, but just learning about what they do, about their culture, and just spending time with them to really build that trust, because that's what it all comes down to. It's about building that trust. I think you've got to be mindful of your communication. I mean, communication is obviously very important at the beginning, but with all of your key stakeholders, but mostly with your staff particularly. And I think you've got to be honest, transparent and consistent in your approach.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Communication is absolutely key, as is standing back, observing, learning, and listening from the team that are there. Because often, uh, Nick will expand further, I'm sure now, but often one of the concerns we sometimes have from owners as we're sort of negotiating a transaction is what changes will be made by the ingoing purchaser on completion. And ultimately, the key consideration is that a purchaser is buying the business as it is in its entirety. If they're buying a really high quality, high performing nursery business, they don't want to go in and sort of change things overnight. And there's been a real change in that, hasn't there, Nick, over the past decade? And we see it more and more so this year, that transition arrangement.
Most definitely. I mean, if you're paying a premium price for a product, you don't want really to change anything at all. Now that might change over the next year or so, whatever, but you want that to continue in the same vein, especially in the short term. So, and we see it a lot, don't we? Integration teams for all sorts of buyers. They've got really, really sharp nowadays. They're really good. They understand that actually that is one of the most critical times. It's not when the money turns up in your account. The critical time is how to deal with those people. There's a gap or a vacuum of uncertainty that needs to be sort of bridged very, very quickly. And it's hard for some because, as Marcia just said, you're not going to please everybody because they might have been given the odd day off here and there, and that didn't match, and you can go home early on a Wednesday. And when you have to standardise that. So, but I think the overriding sort of feedback we get is that once you get past those few days, their opportunities generally get bigger. And if you've been acquired by someone that's slightly larger than you, then there's opportunities to grow within that company rather than it being a smaller entity. So I never take for granted how important those first few days are, and it's such a big thing. The last few days building up to a completion, how that's handled, and for owners, the biggest thing we get asked is, are my staff going to get protected in this deal? And it's an easy one to answer. Yes, they are, because they're the most important. It's as simple as that. If you get that wrong, we've got nothing. So, I mean, the good news is that people that don't quite understand it is that actually all the focus is on that part of the sale, making sure those people are comfortable. And I think I've said it before on one of these. I've been in rooms where that's been happening. They put their hand up. Have you got any questions? And I always remember one person put, "Are you changing our uniform?" Out of all the questions they could have asked, they were more worried about But that is how what it comes down to, because people just don't like change. And they just want to keep doing the next thing and the next thing. So, it's a very interesting point.
That's great. Thank you for that, Nick. Marcy, just wanted to come back to you on the point of, obviously, in the data so far this year, 28% of the transactions we've brokered have been to newer entrants, first-time buyers, and owners that might have one setting and want to open or want to acquire a second setting. We do obviously have a lot of inquiries from owners that actually would like to set up their own nursery from scratch. The benefits of buying an existing nursery are that you're buying an existing business, you're buying the culture and the staff team and operations, and hopefully that business is making a degree of earning to cover the operating costs. But for many, the idea and the objective of having their very own nursery being built to their specifications from scratch as a new business, so they can create their own products, establish their own culture, and handpick their own staff as they recruit. That's quite a different venture, particularly when, having found a site, converted a property or done a new build, you have to then start that business from scratch, and it can take a while to trade up to a mature level of trade, which can be quite a drain on cash flow and resources. Obviously, you've got sort of 2 decades of experience across both of those sort of routes in terms of buying an operational business or setting up a brand new organic new nursery. What would your key learnings from both of those routes be for people that are looking to acquire or looking to develop organically? What would you say your top learnings from those routes are?
Well, I think it's, as you've said, Courtney, it's really what your goals are and how quickly you want to acquire and grow. I mean, I've talked to people who have perhaps, and one of the groups you mentioned earlier, Nick, it's taken them, in some cases, they've acquired a building and waited for 2 years to get planning permission to actually, be able to convert that into a nursery. So I think it's about your overall strategy. Obviously, there are many benefits from setting up a nursery from scratch. As you've said, you can design it the way that you want it, and particularly more so now going forward, you can take into consideration, I would say when I first sort of entered the sector many moons ago, 71 used to be the ideal number for places at a setting. That's changed now, and I'd say it's not so much about the number, it's more about the flexibility on how you build your nurseries, flexibility around your rooms, when you're considering the internals, being able to look at where you're putting your nappy changes, Jack and Jill toilets, all of that, so you can flex those rooms as the demand changes. But also, I would say increasingly now with new builds, you can build for the future. I mean, we talked earlier, Nick and I, when we first came on the call, about how hot it's been in the UK just over this last weekend for a lot of us. And it's looking at that, how are we going to be able to build in temperature controls for the future, both internally and externally? What are you looking at in your gardens? So there are lots of benefits to acquiring, to building new versus acquiring, but also with acquiring, if you have got a strategy to grow quicker, then obviously you are going to be able to achieve that by acquiring nurseries. There are a lot of high quality settings out there, as we said. So I think it really comes back to what your strategy is for your business and how you want to develop, really.
That's really insightful and helpful. Thank you, Marcia. I think going with the theme of temperature and air conditioning and the heat wave we had this weekend, I wanted to touch next on childcare deserts, actually, because that's been a headline in the press over the past, 6 to 12 months or so. Jordan, from your perspective, obviously, every nursery is very different and every nursery is individual, serving the individual needs and basically the demographics of that area. In terms of the demographic of families that you serve, do you see childcare sort of deserts within the parameters of your operations?
I think, to be honest, and what I think is really important for me to note is that I currently now have settings with Toots that in similar locations as in geographically that I've worked in with other groups, but the experience of them settings is completely different and polar opposite. So what I think is also really important is that it's not just necessarily like the location, but actually how that nursery is run, and like Marcia said, actually what the owner is intending to do with it, and the potential cohort of parents that's going to attract is really different. So I think, of course, everyone's experiences with things like this is going to be really, really different. But actually what I've seen is that you can have a nursery literally around the corner that's owned by one group that was founded in a certain way with the intention for it to be built on in a certain way, and a nursery around the corner that was a startup, or one that was an acquisition, or one that has loads of a big waiting list and really high occupancy, in another setting that has no demand. You've got one setting that talks about how funding is really impacting them negatively, and another setting around the corner that talks about it being really positive. So I think that ultimately, yes, we do see there. Geographically, we do see things differently to even the settings up north. But actually, I do think that the answers to a lot of the questions we would get would vary, even just depending on the group and the intentions behind how the people want to run it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you say, it's quite difficult to make overarching sort of analogies because every nursery is so individual and so different. It's almost, even in London, I can see locations whereby just different sides of the road can have different bearings. I remember many moons ago advising on some of the 2006 the children's centres. There was one down in Lowestoft, and there were two separate purpose-built children's centres on either side of the road, literally, because different communities would only sort of use the service within their local area. So I appreciate it. It's quite a difficult one to appraise, isn't it, really?
And I think that, depending on the amount of research, like you said, you've got some people now that are coming into it for the first time ever that will have had loads of sector either experience secondhand from people they know, or they'll have done lots of research as someone that's only ever lived in that community that knows that, the sufficiency reports indicate there is a need for childcare. And there'll be other people that just think, I've got one down the road that there is a need and we have a wait list. So I'm just going to open a sister site here because it'll be easy. And actually it really does take a lot of curiosity, doesn't it, as to how much experience the owner has and what their intentions are and where they want to take it, because just because it worked here doesn't mean it's going to work there.
I think also to add to that, Jordan, I think from our perspective, we see nurseries that fail. We see buildings that become bad because nurseries fail, and actually it just needs a new face to go in there. And we've had buildings that have been with high profile, but it's just not worked for them. It's just been in the wrong location for them. But actually, it's in the right location for someone that might be a bit more local, knows that market slightly better, and their offering is slightly different. Yeah. And time and time again, we've sold stuff to people where it's not been much at all when it's sold. And then you look back at it in 5 or 6 years' time, and it's an outstanding setting, turning over 500, 600, 700,000. And no one would have predicted that. And I suppose that's the entrepreneur in all the buyers or individuals. We see a lot of professionals from other sectors coming into this sector, doctors, all these sorts of things, because actually their skill set isn't actually that much different. But I think the big but is it's not as easy as what some people think. And if you get it wrong, it can go wrong very quickly. But in saying that, and that's why some people might look out to franchising or whatever, because they get a bit of a support network to help them out when they start. And that's super important because, and some of those settings survive just because they are owner operated. Because every day matters. The challenge for anyone that's got 100 staff or whatever is keeping everyone motivated that actually every parent that walks through that door, every child, it's a new day and they've got to be dealt with that way. And that's not a challenge for this sector, for every sector, isn't it? So I think our good mix that we have in this sector of people helps feed all of that. But it is interesting how many sites that might not just be doing that well, or, I don't want to trade there because there's a load of nurseries. Well, if you're on your own trading in an area, you're probably a good chance that there is going to be a nursery coming and you're doing really well. There's probably going to be another one potentially coming your way at some stage. So if you do a good job, I think you can do very, very well.
I would agree, Nick. I mean, when I was with All About Children, we built, that's what we built our brand on. We bought, failing nurseries, and they were failing nurseries, and turned them round. It does take time to turn them round, but it's absolutely possible. And the key to that, really, I think, when I reflect on it, is how you treat your staff. And it all comes back to that how you invest in the staff. When you take over a failing nursery, it isn't the staff that are failing, it is the owners that are failing the staff. And it's how you invest in those staff, what you put into the facilities, how you make them all feel valued, that helps you to turn that business around.
I agree with you, Mark. I completely agree with you. And what I think is really interesting as well, isn't it, that actually that would work there, going in and identifying and rectifying those things immediately. And so it's what the staff want, it's what they're craving for. But I think that from an acquisition perspective and how you intend to integrate them, is you wouldn't want to do that, would you, with a setting that you're buying, like you said, Nick? You're buying this setting that is profitable, established, is heart of the community, and you buy it for all those reasons, and then you go in, you're not curious enough about it, and then you change all the things that actually made that successful. You change the name, you change the brand, you change the colour, you change everything about it, and that's not why the parents picked it. So I think actually you need to be so curious about what you're buying and why, like you just said.
Otherwise you destroy exactly what you've bought, don't you?
Yeah, then you've got nothing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think that there's a little trick that I've seen over the years, which is really interesting. People don't change too much, but what they do is, when they buy, sometimes they change some things in the nursery that are very visible to everybody. I'll give you an example. As you come into reception, the carpets have changed, the flooring's changed, and actually suddenly from day one, parents think, oh, people are investing into this. They're not big investments, but they actually make a lot of difference outside, the curb appeal. Those little things, rather than putting a big sign outside on the new owner. They're not fussed by that. What they're fussed about is how you're going to invest into where I put my child. And that's what gets you onto the next level again. So we do see quite a bit of that. And I think it's quite a cute way of letting your staff base know, and your parent base, that actually this is all a positive, not a negative.
That's quite agree there, Nick. So I do now actually have a whole host of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to pick up on some of these themes. So just on the theme then, we're talking about closure and turnarounds. So we have a question from Mr. Turner. Are you seeing older day nurseries closing and new build entering the market, or is it mainly consolidation? Nick, do you want to pick up on new
So,
build provision and
my short answer to that is no. We're not just seeing older nurseries shut. It's not about age. Yes, look, some buildings are harder to trade from. You've seen from some of the slides that I've shown. We've seen a plethora of Victorian conversions. They do work well, and actually, what they do create is a really nice, homely atmosphere. So, yes, if you built a 6,000 square foot standalone unit with car park in a big garden, etc., easy to park, they can work. But actually, parents quite like the intimacy of some smaller settings at 60, 70, 80 places that are in a fantastic low period property. So I think there's a bit of everything happening. Would you go and build yourself a brand new double fronted Victorian sort of style? Probably not. But I think we learnt straight away that we talked about the size of nurseries. It's all about where it is. As we've seen from some of those sales, just because you're below 50 places doesn't make you unsaleable. It just means your buyer profile is slightly different. But we are seeing all sorts, size, shapes, and conversions throughout the sector. So there's no hard and fast rule, Courtney, to be honest.
that's great. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to come back to you, Nick, in a moment on a question regarding developments, buildings, and leases. But in the interim, there's a question I'm going to pose to Marcia. This is a question posed by Kirsty. And Kirsty asks, how important is demographic knowledge for a future buyer? Should it be information that's collated? So from your perspective,
Yes.
Marcia, is that something that's important to you?
Absolutely, and it's part of our DD. We will always have a look at the demographic profile of an area before taking over a nursery. As I say, it's part of our initial due diligence. Just before we put in an offer, we'll run some demographic profiling you can get a really good feel for an area just by, we always have a drive-by, looking at the housing stock, looking at, local facilities, etc., and you have generally a good idea, but we will always back that up because I think that's really important. And I think, you may not be aware, you may have one view, but the demographic profile could be changing. And I think it's important to consider that actually as well. How many young families have you got? How many, aspiring households? In terms of development, what houses are planned in the local area? So, yeah, I think it's as Jordan touched on previously, I think it's really important to be curious not only about what you're buying, but the demographic area in which you're buying it.
Lovely, that's great. Thank you, Marcia. Nick, a question for you. Sharon, so I am an owner of 4 sites. I have an opportunity to build another, which might be on a lease. I'm keen to build, but possibly not operate it myself. Is there an appetite for turnkey leasing? She acknowledges because on day one of a turnkey, the nursery might not have opened. So if she were to utilise her land and build a nursery, is there a market for that? And I think it might also, I'll prompt you you might want to link in conversations about Harkham and their experiences as highlighted in our insight reports that we've just published as well.
Yeah, again, the short answer is to that lady is yes, there is an appetite for that. It's then all about what specifications people want. So you could build up a nursery to a certain specification. It could be what I would call first fix and decide then to lease it to somebody else. The key about that is who is your tenant going to be? What covenant strength do they provide for you? You're not renting your 2-bedroom flat out on a 6-month tenancy. These are going to be 25-year commercial leases. And if you want to retain that property and have them as a tenant and just take an annual rent, then that could work for you, or it could be a peppercorn rent that could be paying for that property. But I think we see really that done at the very top end of the market. We see a lot of the corporate operators having settings built to a turnkey perspective. That's obviously relevant to the rent that they're paying. But in essence, I think there'll be other factors that will play into that lady's question. And she's got a group of 3 or 4, and then suddenly she's building one. How does that affect hers? Would they see her as competition? All those sorts of things. If it's completely separate, then there is an appetite. It's then making sure that if you do all of that, or if you want to sell it freehold or leasehold, you've got options available to you. Just obviously for everyone on this webinar, it's obviously an easy entry point for people on the leasehold basis than the freehold basis in terms of it's going to cost you less money. That's all it is. It's a simple fact. If you've got to buy the freehold, it's going to cost you more. But some people like to buy freeholds and are really keen to buy the first because they've got control of everything. So I think that's why we see this fair split in the market between a lot of leasehold sales, a lot of freehold sales. But no one is buying stuff on poor tenure. No one wants to buy stuff on a rolling 6-month tenancy. It's just so everyone that's buying leasehold, they've got security there probably for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So it all helps, and what people are looking for. Hopefully that covers off a but I mean the other point about we deal with people like Harkham do sale and leasebacks for people. So someone might own a property and they've got all their cash tied up in it. You can be asset rich, cash poor, but they want to continue with their nursery. So the option is, there is the option to sell their property and carry on trading. So they want to carry on what they're doing, but they actually want to release 700, 800, 900,000 pounds worth of real estate value, and all they're doing then is paying a rent, but they get all their cash out. So there's a multitude or a myriad of options open to sellers, and when we see people that retain their properties, which we've seen a lot of over the last 10 years, because where would you put your money? They end up trying to put it into a bank account and getting 1%. That's obviously getting better. So we are seeing more and more people actually release their properties now, which is quite a big chunk about what we do at Christie Co.
That's great, lovely. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to let you take a breathe now and have a sip of water while you can compose your thoughts on this next question. So we've got loads of great questions. So this next question is from John C. Now, there's probably two elements to this question. I'm going to pose the first elements to Marcia and Jordan first, and then there's an element for Nick as well. So, John's question is, and I'll put this to Marcia first. What do you think are the main risks to the sector? Is the move towards schools, housing, nurseries a risk? That's probably the main element. There's a query around the risk of home builders and retail units being converted on the high street as well. But I think if we keep it simple, what do you think, or what's your view on the main risks to the sector, Marcia? And what's about schools, school-based provision and childcare on the high streets?
Okay, so I think main risk probably to the sector, hot topic at the moment is obviously the funding changes. I think that's the main risk. I think that's what we've seen from quite a lot of the chat groups we're on and the events that we've been to. That's the thing that most people are concerned about. And obviously, we're going to see the implementation of that in September and we'll understand it a whole lot more. I think in terms of expansion of the state funded primary schools, I think we've seen, is that a threat? Well, I think they face the same challenges as we do, really. I think workforce shortages, funding challenges, physical space, competition in the area from private sector. So I think, yes, that is a threat. And I think it has helped expansion in many regions, but I still don't think it's sort of adequately addressed the persistent geographical inequality in childcare. In terms of, I'm trying to cover them all and obviously give Jordan an opportunity to speak. In terms of conversion of retail units on the high street, I don't really see that as a real threat. I mean, I think one of the challenges around those is outdoor space, and I'm sure we'll discuss, we'll have some questions about the DFE proposal to count outdoor space in capacity later. But yeah, I don't see that as a threat. I mean, it's the same as actually a competitor opening up in any building. So no, I don't really see that as a threat. As I say, I think some of the threats really are the threats posed by the DFE.
Okay, right, that's very helpful, Marcia. I'm going to come back to you actually on the DFE topics in a moment. Jordan, your thoughts in terms of the main risks to the sector?
For me, I'm not just going to be this one word person, but being curious is such an important thing for me, because I think with a lot of things, about things that people look to enter into or look to exit, I just think you should be really curious about who's doing it, how they're doing it, why they're doing it. And I think that if you were to look at even things we've discussed today and all of the information that you've presented, but also historically, even last year, and as Marcia said about people that are coming back into the sector, like, it's not somewhere that people are running and fleeing from. you've got people are looking to come back to it, to start again, or to build bigger. And if it was something for me that I think are we at risk? Is there a risk of people, leaving? Is there a real risk to childcare? Should I be looking to exit? If that was the case, why are so many people that know how to do it well remaining in it and returning? Because you wouldn't reinvest the money that you've once made from it and your exit and your sale, that exit plan that you probably put in place 5 years before actually exiting, that took a while to execute. You're not going to risk that capital to come back into somewhere you didn't think, based on experience and what the sector's telling us in statistics, if you thought it wasn't going anywhere. So I don't think there is a threat to that. I think that with regards to, like Marcia said, any competitor, whether that is from a school-based provision, whether that's from high street, whatever it might be, Nick touched on the fact that there is going to be some parents that love the brand new shiny, like, wow, this is exactly what I pictured, this clinical, this clean, this is exactly how I pictured it. And there's going to be someone else that can't think of anything worse because they want their child in this old thatched cottage that has a baby room that can only take 6, because then they believe that they think their child is going to get more attention, or that their staff will know their child better because that's what they think. So I think I'm very keen. I've always done something about inquiry tracking. You should really know what the parents are looking for, because then that will really tell you, actually, is it a threat? Because if all your parents are coming to you because of what you offer, and you look in the local community and there isn't that, what are you worried about? Because like Marcia said, there's a lot of greater things that we should be focusing our attention on that we don't have control over. But actually, would I be worried? If someone was doing a like-for-like copy and paste, be worried. But actually, if you know that your USPs are actually USPs and not just a car park that a lot of other settings in your local area have, then I think that you're eliminating the threat already.
Agreed. No, excellent response. Thank you, Jordan. And Nick, coming on to you. So there's a slight variation because I didn't sort of apply it to Marcia and Jordan, but John's question did read, what do you think the main risks are to the sector / valuations reducing? So what are the risks from your perspective, and what might lead to valuations reducing, I think, is John's query there from a valuation perspective.
I think values are all led by what's happening in the market, what's selling. So the market gets set by what is sold, so that can change. Now, there's no doubt that at the moment that nurseries are selling for exceptional multipliers of their profit. We've never been in such a good place. So that's where the market is. Now, the only things that can affect that are if suddenly, as Jordan was just saying then, the reason people are coming back in, and I would add to that, the reason that people are paying multi-million pounds amount of money is because they see this as a green light sector and they see a future in it. And we all saw it through COVID, the need for nurseries. It's not going to go away. And actually, people were absolutely desperate 5 years ago, ringing us to say, when are these nurseries opening up again? When are they opening up again? We can't cope. Our children need to go into childcare. So, and some of I took the larger transactions, some of the bigger corporates have had their funders that have come and changed recently. There's hundreds of millions of pounds getting pumped into people acquiring stuff, not thinking this nursery sector's going backwards. So there is always going to be challenges. As Marcia said, when the planning changed from D1 to E, there was suddenly this big worry that there was going to be loads and loads of nurseries in town centres, in offices and whatever. And never, guess what? It never happened, or it's not going to happen. There has been circumstances where other buildings are being utilised now, but we've not had a dearth of nurseries opening, because what you do is quite unique, and to do it, start one tomorrow and open tomorrow, and it'd be a very, very simple, is not the case. It is absolutely not the case. So again, these things create a little bit of a bounce, and we find out there's another problem to think about, but actually they seem to fizzle away.
That's great. Lovely. Thanks, Nick. Marcia, I'm going to pick up on your points. Obviously, the topic is sort of navigating and thriving through change, and we've seen a fair amount of change policy-wise in the past 18 to 24 months. Most notably, the expanded early years entitlements, and obviously the sort of final phase of that into September. But also, we've also seen the consultation at present. So it's nice for DfE to actually consult with early years for a change. It's a bit of a rarity, isn't it? But they have chosen to consult on outdoor space and whether or not external spatial areas should potentially be utilised within operations and capacity. So you did touch on that earlier. What's your thoughts, Marcia, in terms of consultation from your personal perspective?
From my personal perspective, I would be, well, firstly, like you said, very much in favour of being consulted. I think it's important for them to ask, and I think it's important for us to respond with what we want. I would be in favour of the consideration, but with a cap. I think it's really important. We need to stop it from being exploited. We need to be able to continue to deliver high quality childcare and education. So for me, that's about as well making those outdoor spaces appropriate. I mean, you know, I know I've talked about the heat, but it is how are we going to make sure that they are suitable in all weathers, in the extreme heat and extreme cold? I think it's going to be really important for us to understand, to get some clear guidance and clarity of what this is going to look like and how we're going to be expected to implement it. I mean, you know, I think one of the things that I'm intrigued to understand is how this is going to work with planning. Across our estate, we have got planning caps in place in terms of number of children we can have in the garden at any one time, number of children we can have internally because of floor space, you know, parking, all of those sorts of caps. And I'd really like to understand with planning departments that are already overstretched and a planning system that you could argue doesn't work very well, how's that going to be freed up to support these changes? Yeah, and just the actual implementation, you know, more adults in a space mean less space for children, more equipment leaves less space for children. So just really understanding what this is going to look like. But I think generally it's a good thing. I am obviously surprised that this only applies to over twos at the moment, where I think most of us probably on this call are seeing demand for the under twos. So it'll be interesting to see if that gets, you know, perhaps they'll implement it over twos and then look to extend it to the under twos. So yeah.
Absolutely. Jordan, anything that you'd like to add further to that?
Just 2 points. The first one, like Marcia said, I think that, you know, without being too much off topic here, I think that as a sector, when we do get the opportunity to have our say, which we quite often say that we don't get very often, I think we do need to take up the opportunity whenever, whether it's DfE, Ofsted, we often talk about these changes that have come into place that impact us. But as the ones that they are impacting, let's make the most opportunities to contribute when asked. I think that's really important. But I think something that, obviously, looking at it from both perspectives, of course, looking at the amount that could potentially impact the occupancy, the total, and then the total revenue, also weighing out the staffing costs, how that would look. But with all of that being taken into consideration, I think that's really important. If you can make it work and you decide that's the best thing for you from an operational perspective, then fantastic. But something that I think we should never lose sight of is that, is it in the best interest of the children still? Because that's something that I think no matter what we talk about, because some, you know, and that relates to every question asked so far, that this setting will be best for you. And when we look at the cultural capital, so where that gap for that child's experiences might be, that this setting here with a fantastic outdoor space that they lack because they're from a high-rise flat, that is going to be perfect for you. But at what detriment is it going to be to that child if we then fill it to the brim with loads of other children, so they are not actually accessing any more outdoor space, and then the reason that parent picked us in the first place has gone? Or those tables that are in the garden that we can then no longer move to create all this outdoor space for them to navigate and negotiate space, and we've got loads of fixed furniture now for them to have lunch outside, or we've tried to do this. But I think that it's, if we can find that balance where it doesn't impact the children in any way other than positively, it doesn't compromise our beliefs and what we originally set out when we intended what we wanted these spaces to be, and of course it only impacts our figures positively, then of course do it. But I think that for me, that wouldn't be a decision that I think any provider should just make just based on figures alone, because the child's experience has to be one that is considered in that one when we're looking at the environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I concur with every comment you made there, Jordan. I think it's key in terms of the child's experience. I also agree, Marcia. My personal view is favourable subject to caps. And I know there's been discussion around 10 or 15% caps, but also that cap, when you think about the average size nursery being 45 places in the UK, a 10% cap isn't giving you that many extra places, is it? But I also agree, you mentioned then about appropriate outdoor space. I think one of the things that I'm sort of waiting to have sight of is in terms of the school-based provision and all these new openings of new school-based provision in September. What's the appropriate indoor space? Never mind the appropriate outdoor space, because we don't quite know what a property, converted classrooms or whatever, how that will be utilised. So I'm intrigued to see how that plays out as well. Nick, I just wanted to come to you on that theme of planning, because obviously Marcia, it was sort of the first thing in her mind in terms of consultation, additional capacity considerations, but planning and the conditions of planning. And I know that it's something which, when you're speaking to owners, there's a lot of focus on Ofsted and the regulator and permitted capacity by the regulator. But sometimes if you've had your nursery business for 10 years, 15, 20, sometimes you forget about some of those conditions that might be attached to planning and the implications of that.
I'm going to be honest, it's one of the veins of my life, planning, because normally what comes out when you're at the end of a process, you're not far off completion. Everyone then just realises that your planning is wrong, and obviously it's a problem. So I'll just explain that a bit further, because you could have been in that building a long time, you could have extended it yourself, and Ofsted is fine with all that. Normally it's highways. Highways are normally the problem, because if you suddenly want to take that nursery from its original planning restriction, it might have been 40 children, you've had 80 in it for the last 3, 4, 5 years, but actually through a sale that triggers someone checking your planning. And what happens? Oh, we haven't got it. Oh, we've been trading at it. Doesn't matter. Oh, we'll go for retrospective. That's fine, but that takes time and it's painful. So, and it happens all the time. So one of the first things we talk to anybody about is, where's your planning? What's it at? What do you know where you're planning, if there's any restrictions? The stuff in the garden that Marcia talks about, we see a fair bit as well, where only a certain amount of children are allowed in the garden at one time. You can sort of see in quite a built-up area why that is the case. It seems a bit draconian to me, but that's not normally a problem through sale, because it is something that it is and people have coped with that. But actually, none of us want to get to the last stage of any deal and find that actually the planning is not quite right. And I can see it in everyone's eyes. It's happened to everybody, and it is super painful. So the one thing to say to anyone prepping or doing their work ready for a sale is that's a thing to get sorted from day one. Because if you're prepping and you can sort it out, because it could take you 6 months to sort it out, it's not an overnight job. And again, it's not because you haven't got the space. It's not because Ofsted don't think you're big enough. It's because someone doesn't like the amount of cars that might be coming down that road, or your neighbour might not do. So yeah, definitely one that takes up a fair bit of my time, Courtney, to be honest.
I understand that completely. I think we're coming to our final few questions now. So the first, well, we've got 3 final questions. Really a question for everyone. So question's been posed. Are chains likely to crowd out smaller businesses? Jordan, do you want to go first on that? Because everyone's got a view on that, obviously. What are your thoughts, Jordan?
I think firstly, and I don't want to be that guy, but I think firstly it's to look at a chain and a group. It are very different things, and as someone that's worked for both, they very much are different. When I worked for a chain, we had a brand pack and we acquired settings and we encompassed them under the umbrella of that chain. So we changed their logo, their name, and everything. A policy. A group where I currently am now, we buy independent settings and we run them independently. So they keep everything that I just said. They keep basically the reason that they're bought is kept. So they wouldn't know that they're being part of a chain, and neither would the people that would go and look around that nursery. So I think, yes, there is going to be a lot more people acquiring independent settings and people wanting to grow their group or their chain. I think we're going to see that. I think there are lots of benefits to that. I think that it can also help when sharing staff, supporting it. Depends on what your plans are. I do think there are benefits to that. I don't necessarily know if we will see a lot more chains, because how a lot of people are doing it now is that they are acquiring independent settings and they have them as within their portfolio, but they don't appear to be part of a chain when you look for them online.
Very, very notable distinction. Thanks, Jordan. Marcia, do you have any sort of thoughts in terms of growth and consolidation and how that landscape might look going forward?
Well, I think really, as we're all aware, the UK childcare market is highly fragmented. I mean, I still think that, you know, I think what was there around 31,000 providers in the UK, and some 80% of those are operated by. I mean, my figures might be slightly wrong, but directionally they're right. So, do I think they will? No, I don't. I mean, I think, you know, when you look at the number of large chains that we have in the UK, it's still a really small number of the total number of childcare settings that we have. So I don't see that really happening. No.
Agreed. No, I think you say there's 80% of the market is still predominantly single site, ma and pa operations, and it's great to have that choice for families. So consolidation's there, but ultimately, it's a very diverse marketplace, and I think it's very, very difficult to have that growth amongst those groups and consolidation. Nick, I'm going to come to you with that question as well, but equally, you've got your favourite questions been raised again. What's the typical multiples at the moment, both for freeholds and leaseholds? So I'm going to sort of let you compose your thoughts, and that's if you had that's your starter for 10, isn't it?
Well, I'll just touch on the point about the corporates, and Marcia's right. It's so fragmented, and if you think one of the biggest operator in this country has got 300 and something settings, that's all. So we're not overrun. There's a place in the market for everybody, and just because you're doing very well and you're a larger group, it's not a problem. Actually, everyone's adding their own bit to the market, and and we're lifting the levels of service. But I think at the end of the day, this is an independent marketplace and still is. So there's plenty of scope for people to have 1s, 2s, 3s, and they don't have to get sort of eaten up by a big corporate. Would be my view. But again, as I say, in fairness and in balance, they do a very good job as well. And you're sort of a victim of your own success. You only want to be gobbled up by one of the bigger corporates because you're doing such a really, really good job, and they want to add you to their portfolio. So it is what it is, sort of thing. Sorry, what was your second part again, Courtney? Sorry, multiples. I was only joking.
Multiples.
I thought I might be able to throw you off then. No, I didn't. I got asked this question again the other day. So my overriding factor is, look, the multiples are as strong as they've ever been. But it does depend on not necessarily where you are, but what you're offering. I go back to it again. Freehold's a little bit simpler. If you're leasehold, you could be making £1 million profit, but if your lease isn't secure and it's rolling and it breaks every 3 or 5 years, it's a problem. It just goes straight to value. So if I go back 5 years or 6 or 7 years, leasehold businesses were selling at 1 to 3 times their multiple of profit. They're a lot higher than that now, and some are higher than others. But again, it's all about sometimes scale. I think you hear stuff going around the market. We've sold for 20 times, we've sold for 15 times, and people try and tell me that sometimes, and I've done the deal, and I'm like, I don't think it did. But so I think the overriding sort of message is multiples are in a really good place. So if you were thinking about selling, that's great. Now for buyers, that's not as good, because they're obviously having to pay top multiples for businesses that people are trying to exit. So it is all super positive. And if anyone wants to reach out to me to give them a more in-depth view on their own thing, I'm more than happy to do that. I just don't want everyone walking away from this webinar thinking they're going to sell 10 times on a leasehold basis, because they're probably not. But we are in a really good place.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. We'll probably leave that there to finish off with. So I'd just like to thank everyone, Nick, Marcia, Jordan, thanks so much for your insights. We've had we've been around various topics across that past hour, haven't we? And I do think we've virtually opened or answered all those Q&A questions online. So I really hope that the audience today have enjoyed this webinar and the insights we've shared. Really a big thank you to Marcia and Jordan to have your views and your opinions shared and your experience shared in this call with delegates is really valuable, and we really thank you for your time. We appreciate you're both really, really busy, so thank you for that. Nick, thanks for your insights also, and we'll be sharing some information further regarding where you can access, or where viewers can access our mid-year report. You can also download a copy from our presentation, and we thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your time, and wish you a fabulous summer and a positive and busy sort of 6 months ahead as we move towards the end of 2025. So thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate your time. Have a great summer.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.